Probably one of the most surprising statistics out there is if you are a mandated reporter, only 3 in 10 folks who are mandated to report actually do report. So there are 70% of the cases out there are not being reported.
It's very important to make a report from the standpoint that if something is going on, it needs to be stopped so that the child is not harmed anymore. Additionally, if there is someone that has a pattern of child abuse, then we can make sure that everything is done so that that doesn't continue, so that other children are not harmed.
If a teacher, daycare worker, or other child-serving professional suspects that a child is being abused, it's really important to listen to that child, listen to what they have to say without passing any judgment.
When you're meeting with the child, I think it's very important to ask open-ended questions and allow the child to respond in their own words. Don't ask questions that would lead or at all try to direct the child in a certain way. Make sure that you're allowing the child to say what they want to say.
The first thing that I try not to do is to express any extreme type of emotion. I don't want to criticize them. I don't want them to feel like they've done anything wrong or that they've shared anything in the wrong way. And lastly, I don't make any promises. I don't say things like, this is going to be the last time that it ever happens to you.
When I, as a physician, am interacting with a child and they're school age and they're verbal and they're communicating with me, one of the things that's most important is you ask simple, open-ended questions. Why are you here today? Is anything bothering you today? And allow the children to describe those things to you.
The first thing that I do is I ask them to talk, and as they come back and talk to me, I don't sit and try to find holes in their story, but I listen to what they're saying, and I really believe them. And they'll feel like they've done something wrong, and I'll tell them that it's not your fault. After that, I'll let them tell me in their own words. I don't really lead them and say, well, did he touch you? And if I feel that there is something going on, I'll go and I'll make a report.
We don't expect people to be, quasi-investigators or CPS workers or doctors. If it rises to the level where you suspect something, the best thing to do is to get the professionals involved.
Anyone who suspects abuse or neglect is required to report it either to the police or to the child abuse hotline. So not only professionals, teachers, and counselors who everybody thinks has an obligation to report, but everybody, neighbors, friends, everybody. If you suspect abuse or neglect is occurring, then you have a criminal obligation to report.
It's very important for professionals to know in their own state specifically what's required of them, and to also understand that is not a responsibility they can pass off to somebody else.
It's important to make a report of child abuse because it's everyone's responsibility to ensure a child's safety. If an investigation is open and it is determined that someone knew about the abuse but failed to report, legal action can be taken upon that person.
The people who are hired to work the hotline are trained to ask the right questions to determine whether there is something valid to report. Just because you're calling the hotline may not be a report generated. It depends on what information you have to share with the statewide intake. If we don't have information, then we can't really save children. A lot of times there's something major going on in a family that people in the community only see a small vision of, and that's enough sometimes to generate a report and really to make a difference in the life of a child. People should have confidence that once a report has been generated, that we are doing what we can to look into the matter. And just because they don't see anything happening doesn't mean there's nothing happening. We could have been requesting the parents to go through a variety of services, counseling, parent training, drug treatment, batter's intervention. We could be requesting that and they could be participating in that. And on the outside, nobody knows that that's what's happening, but something is happening. Teachers are often fearful of making a report, and they often have information that only they would have, so they're afraid that the parent will know that they're the ones making a report, and that's a legitimate concern. But I also think that they shouldn't be fearful or feel bad that they're making a report, because it is their obligation to make a report.
I think there is the fear on the part of some people that if they call CPS, their identity is going to be made known to the family involved in the allegation. And while there is confidentiality involved, the reality is if that case goes to court, that the caller's identity may come out.
All reporters' names are by law confidential. We are not allowed to disclose those names to any source unless the court orders us to tell who called in a report.
It's impossible for a volunteer or a professional who's working with a child to know for sure that that child's been abused. Some children may show symptoms such as anger. They may be failing in school. Other children may not. They may be a straight A student. That's why it's important that even if it's just suspected, make the report and then leave it up to the professionals to determine whether abuse has occurred or not.
We want people who suspect abuse to report it, not people who are positively certain. So sometimes you're going to generate investigations where really there's another explanation other than abuse. And so if you report in good faith that you really truly believe a child's being abused, there is civil immunity.
If you have any concerns at all, or if you don't know, you're not sure, calling the hotline is always okay. It's always okay.
What many people don't realize, there may be a history in that family. We may have information in a file about another investigation that didn't go anywhere, that couldn't be substantiated. So now this second bit of information could make all the difference in the world.
If ever anybody has any doubts about making a report, you should always err on the side of making a report, and it's up to us and the police to determine whether it's something serious enough to be involved in or not. It's up to that person whether they want to share the information that they've made the report to the parent. If the person has a good relationship with the parent, such as a teacher or a counselor, and they're already seeing the child, they can share that information and they can actually help the parent make a report too. In some circumstances, we've had counselors call with the parent, CPS, to make a report, and that enhances their relationship. Sometimes it's detrimental if you do share with the parent that you've made a report, because there are certain circumstances where we want to be the first ones there to talk to the parent. We don't want them to know that a report has been made, because we don't want them to try to coach the children to say or to not say something. Whenever I talk to any kind of community group, any kind of children's groups, parent groups, whenever we go out and talk to kids and ask them what they know about CPS, the first thing they say is CPS takes kids away. That's what everybody thinks that CPS does. It's the only thing people think that CPS does. And in fact, we do it in a rare number of cases. We remove kids only as a last resort. And it turns out that we remove kids in probably less than 5% of the cases we receive. We're really here to help people. We're here to help parents be better parents by providing the services that we have available to them, rather than punishing them for being poor.
The main barrier that exists in small communities are the fact that everyone knows each other, that there is a true sense of community. And because you all know each other, the first reaction is, oh, it can't happen here. Just the fact that people don't want to step up and face the reality that it can happen in this location.
A lot of times child abuse, both physical and sexual abuse and domestic violence, take place inside a home. And really, it is society's place to get involved in those places. Just because you choose to use your residence to commit a crime doesn't mean that you should be allowed to get away with it. If you committed that same act on the street, I don't think people would have that attitude. If you committed the same act against a child that was not your family, I don't think people would say that you deserve any kind of consideration. So the reality is, I think today that child abuse is a societal problem, whether it takes place in the home or not. It's society's place to protect its children.
I think that one of the biggest barriers is that people just don't know the long-term damage that it does. Maybe they've never had friends, anybody close that has been exposed to it as a young age, but I think that there's just not a category in their minds for what this instance can do in the life of a kid 20 years down the road. So I think that that's a major barrier. And one that's just as huge, I think, is ignorance. People just not knowing that state law mandates them to do so, or not really realizing the ease of it, that it's as easy as calling a hotline and saying, hey, this is what I think's going on.
Children are not going to be in a position to report their victimization. It's the one crime we see where the victim doesn't pick up the phone and call 911. And children, more times than not are abused by people they know and they love and they care for. And so they don't have the maturity to understand that what's happening, especially in the area of sexual abuse, may be wrong. So they rely on adults, to make these reports and bring in outside intervention. Some schools will have policies that child abuse has to be reported internally first. If a teacher suspects abuse, you may be required to take it to the principal. Those policies that often conflict with state law that says that the person who suspects abuse cannot delegate that responsibility to another person, but they have to make the report themselves. It doesn't allow principals or superintendents to conduct their own investigation before they allow a report to be made. That's an ongoing problem, and most school districts really should examine their policy to make sure that it's consistent with state law and not try to write a policy that is in conflict with state law.
You need to make regular background checks on individuals because something may have happened in that person's life between the time that they became a volunteer in your ministry and the present time. So you want to make regular background checks, and you also want to put regular training intervals into place. When you do the regular training with your volunteers, and when you have the policies out and available in your church, and you talk about these things on a regular basis, it will act as a real deterrent to anyone who might think of coming into your community and doing any kind of harm. We require that there be 2 adults in all of our rooms with children so that we don't create any kind of environment where there's more risk than is necessary. And then you want to actively supervise the people that are volunteering for you in your ministry. You don't want to have volunteers in back rooms or areas where you can't see what's going on.
Any one-on-one time between a student and any employee is not a good idea. You should never be present with a student alone. And if for some reason you have to be, you should always have access to that room, to that area, so that the employee is not put in a situation that charges can be brought against them. It's very important to address with our parents that we have a system in place to make sure that our students are as safe as possible when they're on campus. We have constant supervision with our students, and that our employees are trained professionals in how to make sure that our kids are as safe as possible when they're here. It has to be the mission of any organization to send out a clear message to any predator that it will not happen here.
Children's Advocacy Center is a program developed to help victims of child abuse. The program actually brings together law enforcement, child protective services, the medical community, and the local prosecution to work these cases together so that the child gets the help that he or she needs and the perpetrator goes to jail.
Well, what would happen is the investigation would be conducted by the different disciplines on their own terms. The police would interview children, and then Child Protective Services the next day, when they received their referral from the police, they would begin their investigation, and they would subject the child and their family to a second set of interviews. And there was really no coordination across all these disciplines. Everybody was more concerned about getting what they needed for their investigation rather than it was in the best interest of the child or putting together a strong case.
So the child had to tell that story over and over and over again. It became very traumatic for that child because of that, But it also caused holes in the child's story because the questions that were being asked were not being asked consistently. So when it came time to go to trial, the defense attorney would pick holes in the child's story. And so now they're interviewed by a trained interviewer, and that child only has to tell the story one time. One, it lessens the trauma, but also it makes for a better case when this case goes to court.
A forensic interview is an interview to determine whether abuse has or has not happened. It's non-leading, non-suggestive, therefore meaning we don't provide any information to the child that they haven't initially given to us first. Law enforcement uses a forensic interview to gather information and to determine what type of actions they're going to take in investigating their case.
When we go into a courtroom, we need an advocacy center that will give that child everything they need outside of the courtroom. We find that these cases are perpetrated by family members, and children especially don't like to talk about those issues. And so when you employ the forensic interview process, we get that comfort level from that child, and they're able to go ahead and tell the truth, and we're in a position to adequately present that evidence to a jury. And even after the process, they are still there to make sure that that individual is made whole, because once the conviction is had, the healing process is just beginning.
When we have children who've been abused, obviously they need a lot of support to deal with all of the issues that come with abuse. And so we can help them sort of work through all of those things and begin to help them cope better, to feel like they can handle life.
Therapy gives them time to heal. It gives them time to learn healthy coping skills. It gives them time to understand that what happened was not their fault. So the whole point of therapy is just to take some time out, deal with the trauma, deal with what's going on, and get them back on their feet to being kids.
There have been studies done on perpetrators in jail, and what those perpetrators have said is that there are at least 17 other victims out there that they weren't caught with. So it's not only important to protect that one child who's been abused, but you may be protecting tens or 20s or maybe even hundreds of other children in the community from that perpetrator.